Hello, dear Facebook audience. We're happy to welcome you today on Thursday, and we're here, me and Cultural Affairs Officer Deanna Seed, to welcome you and to talk about presentations.
Hello, it's very nice to see you all again. It's going to be a really great session and a very useful one too. So Lilith, I'm sure you've heard lots of presentations in your professional life and your personal life as well. And I have as well. And something that I think is really interesting that's different from Armenian presentations that I've heard versus American presentations that I've heard. It's my impression that the American presentations tend to be much more structured and much less formal and more to the point, kind of getting at the essence of what the message is, but then also starting with something that kind of connects the speaker to the audience more. It's not the title so much that connects the speaker, it's them making themselves more approachable to their audience, maybe through a joke or an anecdote or something along those lines. Is that your impression?
Yeah, exactly. To form the bridge with the audience and to remove the stress and to make the atmosphere very friendly.
So I don't know if Armenians do that quite as much. I think they rely more on the formality of the presentation to set the tone for the talk.
Exactly, and generally they talk more, and they come to the very specific point and the core of the presentation. I mean, they approach it longer. They take a long way to approach it. So there are specific differences between Armenia. I mean, this is culture specific.
Yes,
sometimes.
Yes. But I think it's important to note, because when you're speaking to an audience that's culturally different from you, you try to be a little bit more aware of what they're expecting to hear.
Exactly.
If you're defending your thesis in front of a board of Armenian professors, that's a very different speech and dynamic and tone and style of presentation than pitching your business proposal to a potential investor. And so I think you just have to focus on how you're going to structure your message and what does your audience expect to hear.
Yeah, you've got to know your target audience, who you're talking to, and as you said, you've got to know their expectations to form a successful and persuasive presentation.
Yeah, so the other thing that I found also is that audiences listen differently, and Armenian audiences tend to be a bit more engaged both with each other and with the speaker than American audiences, where they are generally much more quiet and reserved. And it's considered almost impolite if you don't, if you're talking or if you're on your phone or something, it's considered almost impolite to an American audience. But I think the Armenian audiences, they more expect that sort of behavior.
Yeah, that's actually that's nice for every speaker when he's listened to. But I have observed that very often Armenians, when they start getting into their cell phones, I have observed them recording the presentations quite often. I mean, you don't know generally what they are doing inside their telephones.
No, that's a good compliment to the speaker, because it shows that you're engaging with your audience, and they'll maybe want to think a little bit about what you want to say afterward. So just for the audience component also, because audiences do tend to listen differently, everyone has different learning and comprehension styles also, and for American audiences, they're more used to a repetitive structure. So there's that joke about, you say, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say, and now I'm going to say it. Look, I'm saying it. Oh, I just said it. Did you remember what I said? This is what I said. And then that is the structure of the presentation.
Yeah. Well, in case of business presentations, you've got to get more concentrated on the content. Then, I mean, you cannot like hit around the bush all the time. You've got to be very specific, because I mean, if there are like business people sitting, they expect specific information, data from you. So probably you've got to be more specific.
Yes, and there's always the presentation style, which matters also.
Yeah.
Are you formal? Are you monotonous? Are you lively? Are you casual? And all of those things kind of sum up into what makes you more memorable to an audience.
Exactly. You're absolutely right.
Yes. But I think bottom line, most important tip that I would offer, be calm.
Yeah.
Don't be nervous.
Yeah.
There's always that awful statistic about people fearing public speaking more than they fear dying. I don't think that's a true statistic, but I think there are a lot of people who are afraid of public speaking. And I'm not quite sure where it comes from, but I think if you've got a good presentation that you want to deliver, and if you're confident in your material, and if you've practiced your material ahead of time, then whether or not you're doing it in a foreign language, you'll be more poised and prepared, and that will communicate to your audience.
Exactly.
I'm sure teachers have similar experiences because teachers present every day.
Every day, exactly. And if you have like several classes, you become a presenter like 3 or 4 times during the day.
That's right. You're lucky. You're a practiced expert at this.
Thanks a lot.
Yes. So Lilith has lots of tips for you and lots of great knowledge to offer. So please engage her with questions as you wish. If you disagree with her, that's also okay. Post it, and then we'll have a great discussion about it. So
thanks a lot.
All right. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I'm going to continue what Diana said about being calm. The most important thing is that you, while making a presentation, you should not talk very, very fast. And the hardest time for every listener is when the speaker talks very, very fast and sometimes with that accent. The problem here is that sometimes the speakers, they are quite fluent in the language and they are comfortable speaking. But the problem is that they come up with a bad accent. And if you talk slowly, you can avoid this problem. Unless you're certain that your accent is absolutely understandable, always speak a little slower. Second, you've got to speak very clearly. Say each word very clearly and emphasize the most important words in your presentation. And even if your listeners do not understand specific points or certain words in your presentation, that doesn't matter, because if you come up with specific emphasis, if you come up with specific intonation, the general meaning is going to be understood. The third thing, as Diana said, you've got to prepare ahead of time. Practice is very, very important in presentations. And if you practice several hours ahead of your presentation, you're going to make your presentation very confident, and you're going to know what you're speaking or what you're going to speak. Another thing which is really of crucial importance is that you've got to make very simple statements. I mean, don't run after very long and complicated sentences, because they are, first of all, difficult to digest, and sometimes they may distract the listeners from the main point, from the things that you're saying. So turn to simple sentences. The simpler the sentence, the easier it is to understand. And another thing which is also very important, try to define the goal of your presentation. And if you have your starting point, if you have your goal, your destination, it's going to be very easy for you to pave your way through the presentation and to take your listeners together with you. Every successful presentation has a proper beginning, middle, and end. So the general scene is set, and you generally start your presentation with your gratitude to the listeners, and with your introduction. So to express it, you can say, for example, good morning and welcome to, and you come up with the name of the, for example, conference hall, or for example, the hotel that you're having your presentation at. Or you may say, for example, thank you very much for coming today, or thank you for coming together at such an early hour. Or, for example, you might say, my name is, for example, Lilith Ermanjan, and I'm responsible for, and you state your position, you state the job that you're doing in the specific organization. And when you introduce yourself and when you greet people, immediately the next thing to do is to outline your presentation, to tell your audience what you're going to talk about. That is, you can start by saying the purpose of today's presentation is to, or for example, the purpose of my presentation is to show you, to explain to you, or to give you an update, or to give you an overview of, and you go on with the topic. Or for example, you can say the main points I will be talking about about are first, second, third, etc. Or you may say, for example, in today's presentation, I'd like to cover, for example, like say 5 points, first, second, third, etc. Or the main points are going to be discussed, or briefly, I have 3 things to say, and you go on talking. And generally, for you not to get distracted, especially if you're not very comfortable while making the presentation because of the language issues or something of the kind, explain your listeners that there will be a time for questions. So they will take their time to answer the questions. To do it, you can say, for example, if you have any questions to ask, I will be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. Or, for example, you may say, if there are questions you would like to ask, please leave them to the end of the presentation. Then I'll do my best to answer them. And once the foundation is laid, you start your speech, for example, by saying, let's start, or let's begin by looking at, or I'd like to start my presentation by. And sometimes it happens that your audience is well aware of the topic you're going to discuss, and they know the general outline of the topic. So in such cases, you may say just like, as you're well aware, we are, and things like that. Or you can say, for example, as you remember, we're concerned with, and you state the problems or the issues that are going to be discussed during the presentation. And presentations mostly come up with specific charts, with specific graphs, graphical like pictures, or for example, like slides. And when you make a presentation with charts and with graphics, you need to expand on them. And to introduce your listeners to the graphics or to the chart, there are 2 very important words that you might need, and these words are to elaborate and to expand. So when you want to introduce a chart, you may say, for example, I'd like to expand on my point about increasing, for example, well, say our sales. Or, for example, you may say, let me elaborate on that. Or would you like me to expand or to elaborate or to illustrate my point? I would like to, and you show the chart. Or you can say, for example, if you look at this and you show the chart, you may see, and for example, the graphic shows or gives a vivid idea of. And if you come up with charts and with graphics, generally you need your listeners need time to understand and to digest the information that is on the chart. So always provide your listeners with the time to digest the information. And after taking 1 or 2 minutes, you can say, for example, as you see in the chart, and you go on explaining the chart. Or, for example, you can say, this clearly shows that, and you go on. Or, for example, you can say, from this graphic, we can understand that, and you go on speaking. And generally, every presentation is made up of specific topics. It's not just one thing that you're discussing, and you need to make the transition from one topic to another, or to change to a different topic. So you've got to bear in mind that you are well aware of what you're saying, but your listeners are not. So you've got to provide that specific transition. So to do it, you can say, for example, now let's move on to show that you are done with the previous topic and now you're discussing another one. Or you may say, turning to, and you go on speaking. Or this leads me to my next point, or the next issue I'd like to focus on is that. Or you can say, I'd like to turn to something completely different, or moving to the next section, let's talk about, and you go on speaking. And once you decide to link your point to a previously stated one, because if that's a presentation, generally it demands a chain of ideas, and I mean, every other idea is somehow connected with the previous ones. So you can to link your current idea with the coming one. You can say structure your speech by saying, as I said at the beginning, or you may say, this relates to what I was saying earlier, or you can say, for example, this ties in with, or let me go back to what I was saying earlier, that, and you go on speaking. And sometimes there comes the need of rephrasing or restating of what you're saying. The need may come up because, for example, your listeners do not really understand what you're saying at that moment, or for example, you want to make a special emphasis of what you're saying, and here to do it, you need to, for example, paraphrase, to simplify or to clarify your point. To simplify or to clarify your point, you can start your speech by saying, put another way, this means that, or you can say, simply put, or you can say, in other words, or another way to do it is, so what I mean to say is, and you go on speaking. Or, for example, to put it in another way, and you go on. Actually, it turns out that this is, for example, the general end of your presentation, and you've got to, and you structure your presentation very neatly, and you need to finish it up neatly as well. So the most important thing is to bring your audience to the understanding that this is the end, by saying, for example, well, that brings us to the end of final section, or that concludes my presentation. Or if you were out of time, you can just simply say, it looks like we're out of time, and you finish up. Or you may just as well say, for example, now if I can just summarize the main points that were discussed during the presentation, or I'd like to recap the main points of my presentation by, and you go on speaking. Or unfortunately, I have to remind you that, for example, this is the end of the presentation, or for example, let me remind you of some of the main issues that we discussed today. And the very, very final stage of your presentation is thanking your audience. It is really difficult to follow someone's speech generally, and you've got to be grateful to your listeners for listening, for taking their time, and for getting into what you're saying. So thank the listeners and invite them to ask questions, so initiate questions. You can say, for example, now I'd like to invite any questions you may have, or please feel free to ask questions if you have any. And by the way, you can ask questions if you have any. I will be very, very happy to answer them when my personal presentation is out. Or you can say, for example, if you'd like me to elaborate on any point stated, please ask. Or you can say, if anyone has got questions, I'll do my best to answer them. And when your listeners come up with questions, and when you answer them, always make sure that your listeners are happy with the answers that you provided. To do it, you can say, I hope that this is what you wanted to hear. Or you can say, for example, I hope this explains the situation to you. Or you may say, for example, you may ask, does this answer your question? To make sure that your listeners are happy with what you are saying. But out of everything and anything, as Diana said, you've got to be relaxed. You shouldn't get stressed, because as she mentioned, there is a statistics that probably 80% of speech makers are really, really stressed. And once you you are stressed, you make enormous number of mistakes. So the most important thing is to relax, to speak clearly, and to show your passion, to make your presentation interactive. That is to invite your listeners to participate in your speech, and most importantly, use humor, because they say humor is going to save the world. So use humor for your presentations. We've got questions, and one of our users is asking about letter writing. This was the final part of today's lesson, so I want to tell you that our very next meeting is going to be devoted to letter writing. Okay, so by the way, this is a fantastic book. You can make use of it. We're going to devote one, or if it's too bulky, we're going to devote 2 lessons to letter writing. Another question, and the question is by Haikuhia Rabekan. She's asking, how long must a presentation last in general? It greatly depends on the topic, but generally the statistic says that after some half hour or 40 minutes, listeners are not able to follow the speech. So if you're out of your main topics, do not hit the bush. Do not take your time, or do not prolong the presentation. The more laconic it is, the better it is digested by your listeners. Like 40 minutes maximum, an hour I think is enough. Well, depending, of course, on the topic of the presentation. Karen Parikan says, create a logical flow to your presentation. What about this idea, creating a logical flow? Well, actually, the logical flow, that is, logical chain, is important in absolutely any speech, because I mean, one point that you're producing, that you're making, should be logically interconnected with the other one, because if you do not provide the logical flow, if you do not provide the logical chain, your presentation is going to be like distracted, is not going to be concrete, is not going to be interesting, and finally it's not going to be persuasive. Before the final stage of our meeting today, I want quickly to pass over our previous lesson homework, because there are people among you who want to check the previous homework. So the first exercise, and actually we had 2 exercises. So it says, I don't have my student identification card. That is a card that shows that you are a student, that proves that you're a student. So the second one says, I don't have any cash with me. Cash meaning to say like physical money. Can I buy credit card? I lost my ticket. The fourth is, I missed my train, meaning to say that the train went away and you didn't catch it. We can't find the platform that our train leaves from. Are the lavatories occupied? Another word for lavatory is restroom. I asked for sleeper seat because I like to sleep on trains. My window won't close completely. Can you fix it? Meaning to say I can't close the window till the end. Why is there such a long delay? I'm hungry. Is there a restaurant car on this train? And the second exercise, the Four Seasons Hotel. How can I help you? Hello, my name is Mr. Wang. I'd like to reserve a room. Do you have any available from March 10 to March 13th? Yes, we do. Would you like a double room or a single room? How much is the double room per night? It's $75 per night, and the single room is $65 per night. I'm looking for a room that would be nice for a romantic weekend. Which of the two do you recommend? I'd go with the smaller one, the single one. It's much nicer, and 2 people can stay in that room. Okay, I'd like to reserve that one then. All right, I've made that reservation for you. And how would you be arriving? We'll be arriving by car. Perfect, we've got an underground lot where you can park your car. Okay, I hope that today's lesson was useful. Actually, it was structured upon your requests because there were many people who asked for a lesson about presentations. And thank you all, and hope to see you back. Thank you. Goodbye.